All right. We're going to start. We're going to run a little video. I appreciate you from breaking up and coming over. Don't worry about the running a little late because we have buffers. They're called break times. So, but here in the bag, there's this photo booth. That is, you just put your hand on it, and you can get pictures taken. So you got, don't miss the opportunity of that high-tech opportunity there. I'm sitting here with someone who is going to tell you some amazing things, and I'm happy to have lucky enough to have met him about 5 years ago or so in Austin, Texas. And I want him to share a little bit about his journey and then dive into what his offerings is. I can tell you that when I was the Chief Information Officer at Austin Energy, the first thing that I did after taking the job is I talked to all the carriers, AT&T, Verizon, all the, back in 2003, Sprint and T-Mobile and a bunch of other players. And I talked to them all and I said, look, I need connectivity. I'm trying to automate the entire infrastructure of the utility. Can I get a smart grid network on a box? And they all looked at me and laughed. What is that? What does that look like? Well, I need all these things, restoration times, uptime, cybersecurity, reliability. It needs to be up for 20 years, all these things that I need. And it needs to be affordable. Affordable is the key thing. And they all laughed at me. And anyway, so you all know my journey at Austin Energy. So we're lucky enough to have Robert Schwartz, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of a publicly traded company called Anterix that hopefully, and God willing, will be discovered by every utility in the United States and become a masterpiece of how you build the smart grid of the future. With that said, Robert, just tell us real quick how you got to be CEO of Anterix, and then we're going to run a video for them to realize what we're talking about.
Happy to do so.
And please, a warm welcome to Robert.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Andres. And the worst place to be always on the agenda is after lunch, but second to that would be after Llewellyn from White House Chronicles, and I got both of those, so we'll play it as it is. So thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. It was a little over 5 years ago. I looked it up when Andres and I met, and to put it in context of who we are and what we're doing now versus then, he was one of the few people as we arrived at a conference trying to understand the needs of the sector and understand. I spent my career in the wireless communication space, as long as there really has been one, over 30 years, helping build innovative wireless ventures and companies that have served our nation. The largest and most compelling one was Nextel. The company Anterix that I have the pleasure of running now was founded by the founders of Nextel, where I worked also in the early 90s. And Nextel really was the first company that came to the US to build a nationwide wireless footprint. It's pretty amazing to think about it. Back then, it was all fragmented companies throughout the country. But more importantly for that, and more importantly for our mission at Anterix, is that Nextel focused on the needs of industrial users that weren't being addressed by wireless carriers in the US. And having been at a wireless carrier, and a lot of my friends work at wireless carriers, they've got great businesses that focus on consumers like my kids, businesses like Goldman Sachs and other great enterprises, and have a phenomenal business. But when you get to the unique requirements of vertical markets, the large carriers don't always address them specifically. And so at Anterix, what we did, going back those 5 years ago, we bought a nationwide slice of spectrum that wasn't being used by Sprint. We purchased it. It was spectrum we knew well because it was actually spectrum at Nextel we owned, and Sprint had bought Nextel. We then went through an FCC process that took us just about 5 years, a process to change the usage of those licenses. They were narrowband two-way radio licenses that could be used for important critical two-way radio systems, but it was the last of 7 bands that the FCC had put out and weren't really being utilized heavily at all, very lightly used. And so we went to the FCC, and eventually we started with that conversation that I had years ago, got the support of a lot of the utility industry, industrial users that said we need broadband spectrum, because there was really there's a shortage of broadband spectrum for anyone but these carriers, the AT&Ts, Verizons, and T-Mobiles that want to use it for their own private use. And so our model is we own this spectrum and we lease it to utilities and other users, industrial users throughout the country, to build their own private LTE networks. LTE is the same technology, the 4G, 5G phones that are in your pockets, it's the same technology that they use, and so it allows you to get the economies of scale and scope that are being utilized by vendors throughout the globe. So I can go on forever, but I'll stop there.
No, that's wonderful. Do we have the video? Do you want to do a transition to the video now?
So much has happened in the past year. As an operating company, we're the nation's largest holder of 900 megahertz spectrum and a technology partner driven by purpose, helping utilities decarbonize, digitize, and modernize the grid. But the real transformation has begun. Our utility industry partners and critical infrastructure organizations need to build private wireless broadband networks today, not tomorrow. And we think Anterix is in the best position to provide the foundational layer of private wireless spectrum, licensed in low band for these networks. As a partner with the utilities, we can provide the technology platform as well as the expertise needed to maximize their investment. During an unprecedented time, Anterix delivered on its promises. From signed spectrum agreements to experimental licenses to launching an ecosystem, momentum is on our side. Anterix is poised to make 900 megahertz the de facto private wireless broadband standard for utilities. Thanks to an experienced team, we're enabling utilities to help transform the nation's electric grid as well as their ability to maximize it.
Thank you. As you were saying, it's been a great journey, and you didn't have the video 5 years ago. Hopefully, our conversations helped make that video a reality in terms of the focus and the benefits and the offering, right? And the importance of maybe the timing. The timing, I think, is key. Now, when I think about what to share with the audience, there are so many things. Now, one of the key things about why you're here today is that you're participating in the Digital 360 Summit, which is our third annual conference, and you guys are founding members of CEDAR. So tell me, what are your thoughts on CEDAR? I mean, clearly the low-hanging fruit is, faculty, students helping build test beds and use cases. But what are you thinking in the long-term horizon as you're teaching all the cities and all these utilities in Texas?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting us to be part of CEDAR. I'm here, by the way, with two of my colleagues, Ryan Gerbrand, who's going to speak later, our Chief Operating Officer, and Steve Ryan, one of our leaders from the product development team. And we're here in force, honestly, because we're so excited about what's going on with the CEDAR program. For us, it's a springboard. I explained, I came from the telecommunications world, the wireless telecommunications world, and as we've explored the application, because when you get down to technology, it's just technology. It doesn't do anything by itself. What creates value is the applications, putting it into the mix with all of the great partners, the university itself. We just lost, there we go. And all of the elements that it's going to bring together. For us, the solution set. So you think, I referenced before the phone in your pocket, right? LTE is purely a pipeline. right? You can think about it in any kind of pipeline, and it's what are we going to put through that? So when you got your phone first, you were making phone calls, you started texting, you thought that was really cool, and then maybe you started to get slow videos on it. Now people are watching Netflix, hailing taxi cabs, ordering their food, balancing their checkbook, and doing mission-critical things on tablets and field force and otherwise. And so it's the same idea here that LTE, by joining forces with all the group at Cedar and the partners, what are the exciting things we can do with it, right? We can do things like, simple things, control smart grids, be able to use it for Ameren, our first customer, their first application is simple things like getting to reclosers in places where they had no levels of control of it in the past. And what does that do? That's about resiliency. It's adding resiliency to a network. Now it's about connecting to renewable energy sources, right? Distributed energy sources that you put in places intentionally where there aren't people, right? Where are you going to put windmills? Where are you going to put battery storage? And how do you connect to those places? And how do you have a constant level of connectivity and communication so for these, especially these intermittent source of power, you have the level of need. And so those are all things that we think are going to fall into the test bed and the hotbed, which I think is going to be, to mix metaphors, a springboard for the whole industry to help drive some of these applications forward.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Ameren as sort of one of your first customers, and I'm delighted to say that I was in many meetings, a while back with them and many others, and obviously Exelon, Xcel Energy, San Diego Gas and Electric, Dominion, and New York Power Authority, in addition to Ameren, have signed up to deploy the technology. And I'm happy to say that Texas State is the only university that has the experimental license so far. We're not a monopoly of any kind. But we would encourage any other university to really get a hold of what's going on. NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, is testing with the network. But when you think about your customers that have signed up, Rob, as an operator all your life, working with businesses, it's always difficult to sell to an enterprise because there are many buyers of the enterprise. When you think about what was it ultimately that Ameren went, yes, we get it, we're doing it. What was the simplification of what? The easiness of what? What was that thing?
Yeah, first of all, it does take a visionary, right? And there's some, Warner Baxter as the CEO brought in a chief digital officer, a woman named Bhavani, who's spectacular. And so they had an innovative mindset, and that's important, right? It's what you do, it's what this group does, but it takes forward thinking. What's interesting is there was something in it for everybody at Ameren, right? That's the unique thing about LTE, because it's like a Swiss Army knife of capabilities. And so to the CFO, they literally did a business case to say, if we consolidate these 22 different networks, that's how many different private networks Ameren is currently running, if we can consolidate those onto a single LTE network, just like I described all those applications on your cell phone, we're going to save money. So just on the cost basis alone, they said this makes economic sense. But then when you get to the visionaries like Bhavani as the chief digital officer, the use cases that are coming down the pike, their need to connect up so many different devices, for them, literally millions of sensors that are going to be throughout their service territory in two states, Illinois and Missouri, they can't do it. They can't do it cost effectively, and they just can't do it, because what happens is those devices are often in places where there isn't an alternative. You don't have wireless carriers serving the places where you have transmission lines, and you don't have the alternative to put it on other more obsolete networks. So it's also a question, in sort of selling across the organization. Cybersecurity obviously is such a critical topic. Southern Company has been a leader in demonstrating the use of private LTE as a secure environment to be able to protect from cyber incursions, right? Because if you think about the sort of level one of cybersecurity is being able to separate that network from the public internet, right? You don't want public incursions, people be able to buy a phone on a street corner and be on the same network as your mission critical devices. If you build a network that's firewalled, separate, air gap from that network, that's the first step. Secondly, then they're building layers of cybersecurity as they want it, right? When you build a private network, you don't take an off-the-shelf product that someone else is offering you with whatever security you have or don't have. Here you have the ability to build it precisely the way you want, and no one knows how you build it, which is a big part of that security too. So it's much harder for people to understand how to break through it or how to get into it. So there's layers and layers of this that really add to the value that we've seen from that Ameren saw. The other part is the business units. We sold to, they have 2 different regulated states. Each of them had their own different use cases. It's interesting, as you know, they're under separate jurisdictions and they have separate problems to solve. And so they have a different list of their top prioritized use cases within each state. They're all going to converge. I mean, we have a list. We've launched something called the Utility Broadband Alliance. It's an alliance that we founded with a couple of utilities and now has grown to be, we spun it out. It's a nonprofit run by utilities, of which we're still an active member. But through that group, they've published now what the utilities believe are the top prioritized use cases that private LTE will enable. And Ameren is an active leader within that organization. And so this is now becoming much more than when we started 5 years ago talking about this novel idea. Now it's a movement, and it's a movement of utilities driving it, of which we're obviously supporting it as much as we can. But that's really what's exciting, and that's what got Ameren.
So the UBBA, real quick, they're having their annual conference coming up, right, in October?
They are in October. Steve Ryan can tell you more about it than I can.
Excellent, excellent.
But it's going to be in, hopefully, as long as everything continues in the right direction, in St. Louis, hosted by Ameren in their backyard, and there's going to be a whole slew. They're having a plug fest of sorts as part of it as well, where you can, companies are coming, bringing their devices, working on the interoperability within the LTE environment. But the beauty of that environment is that it exists already. We're not recreating. There's no technology development here. This is about interoperability of putting, how do I attach a recloser to an LTE modem?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's plug and play.
And so Bobby and team had reached out to me and, hey, you got to come over and
Bobby Harris, formerly with UTC, she's great, and she's the director of the Utility Broadband Alliance.
Now, real quick, one of the key things, and you know this from the days of Nextel, and to make the case for me, the customer that is going to operate this network is, and tell us about you. You have a whole program around building your own ecosystem and helping me figure out what devices, what elements, who. So tell us about your ecosystem, your active ecosystem.
Yeah, we're wildly excited about this. And again, Ryan and Steve, Steve's got a booth set up over here. You can go by and hear more about the, we call it the Anterix Active Ecosystem Program. And what it is we wanted to build a community of vendors, developers, technology leaders to focus on creating this ecosystem for this community, for critical infrastructure users of private LTE networks on 900. And we now have over 50 members of it. It's really incredible. We've got big brand names like Motorola's and Ericsson's and Nokia's and Cisco's, Qualcomm, to leading innovators in cybersecurity and new innovative devices. And so it's really becoming our sandbox, the sandbox of the industry, is to be able to figure out the right ways to be able to plug and play all this great capabilities to keep expanding the use. Again, no different than what you see in the development of LTE. I've been around old enough to say, since 1G and 2G, and now we're in a 4G to 5G evolution. The E in LTE is evolution because it continues to evolve with the investment of all the global technology vendors and all the global wireless carriers. And so to join in with that community as part of the critical infrastructure, rather than using one-off technologies to solve these problems one at a time, is a complete paradigm shift, but one we think is critical to solve some of the impending challenges with utilities. I want to mention San Diego Gas and Electric, our most recent customers, as we're talking about use cases. Their primary use case is about wildfire mitigation. Obviously a growing challenge in California, but also in regions throughout the country, and the kind of sensors that they're using. It's a technology that's been available for a while, but the broadband wireless network wasn't available. The simple idea is a line gets broken, it falls to the ground, the spark of that line is what can start a wildfire in a dry area. They put sensors on poles throughout their network. They can measure when that current stops flowing through the line, and their goal is to be able to depower that line before it hits the ground, which they estimate on average about 1.4 seconds. And so they've got pilots already going with that technology. Now it's about deploying a broadband low latency network, because that's the communication link that was previously missing that we're enabling. And so we always talk about the cost justification of these networks, but you can imagine with all of these valuable use cases, what's the value of stopping one wildfire? What's the value of using that to stop one challenging environment when a line falls and you have an active line on the ground? So we're very excited about that one.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I'm incredibly excited about is kind of like the next 24 months, because, and know that, Rob, who's the Chief Executive Officer of a publicly traded company, can say or nay about what I'm about to say, but we have a lot of CEDAR members. And these CEDAR members are making different things, street lights and meters and so on and so on and so on. And they are very excited about the possibility of working with the cities that own water and electric, and then the standalone electric water utilities, that, this new ecosystems and sort of the concept of, this Swiss Army knife of LTE, kind of like an iPhone on steroids with a bunch of apps. And a lot of these folks want to glue these apps to Anterix. And they're coming to me like, can we meet the Anterix guys? We want to be in the Smart Networks lab that you're standing up. And so what do you think of that in terms of the explosion of the possibilities of, like having an Anterix music store of, a gazillion things?
No, I think it's brilliant. I think it's exactly where the Anterix Active Ecosystem program goes, of being able to have all of these products available to be utilized on this. But I think as you're talking about Texas too, I don't want to miss that point that, obviously there's a unique situation in this state, and unfortunately we've seen some challenges because of that. But I see challenges as opportunity. As an entrepreneur, as someone who's built companies like this before, and I think that collectively the power of all of the community, starting with CEDAR, starting with the university, but getting into the vendor community, the opportunity to work collectively to build a statewide network on private LTE is tremendous. And so we see the country that way. We really do. I mean, we talk about these individual dots of utilities, right? Ameren is a big utility, but they're a tiny little wireless footprint. The value of this opportunity to standardize and build a nationwide network of networks. So if you think about the commonality of it, and statewide is, we've been talking in regions throughout the country where there's bordering utilities, that each of them have to make their independent decisions, no different than Ameren, Illinois and Ameren, Missouri had to make their independent decisions. You can imagine the bordering utilities around there, going all the way across the country. We see that opportunity in Texas. And when I say utilities, right, we're dealing primarily with electric utilities, but you can imagine if you build the network out, the marginal cost to serve other parties on that, whether it's water utilities, whether it's gas utilities, or whether it's universities or third parties, is de minimis. Yeah. It really is. The fixed cost of building a network is the fixed cost. And being able to divide that cost up among all those potential users from a recovery standpoint, we think is really valuable. And that's a state issue, right? I mean, it really does get down to state regulators agreeing to potentially fund that. We're in a very unique situation now, too, with federal funding coming down the pike. I know we're going to talk about that a bit later, but to me, there's an opportunity to actually solve some of these big issues. And obviously, the state of Texas has seen some tremendous ones in the past year, and potentially do it with the catalyst of federal funding as well through this infrastructure bill that hopefully will get passed soon.
Absolutely. So in closing, fortunately, when I have a limited time, and I could talk to Rob for days about this topic, because I love, if I was a CIO or CTO in an electric utility today, and I had the challenges of needing smart grid dial tone, secure, reliable, pervasive, affordable, with a gazillion devices to plug on, who would I call but the Ghostbusters in New Jersey of Anterix, right? Where were you in 2003? My God, it took you so long. You're here, finally. Thank you. Now, I do have to plug, and it's probably in your program and you haven't paid attention, but we have tours of the labs on Thursday afternoon. And one of the things you're going to see at Star Park is actually the Anterix network running at Star Park, as we are in the beginning, early stages, crawling stages of building our world-class Smart Networks lab. And so it is up and running. And in order for that to happen, we had to strike a partnership with Lower Colorado River Authority. Anybody from LCRA here today? No, they haven't gotten here yet. So LCRA is on board. They're working with us. They're going to be joining CEDAR. It is fantastic that they're going to. And we have a network up and running. And as they say, build it and they will come.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Rob, for being with us. And we're going to go to the panel. And my pleasure. It's an honor to have you. And be well, be good, and talk to all these guys that are on the other side. They want to talk to you and want to be members of that wonderful ecosystem. Please, hand of applause for Rob.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me, Andres.